In the fog-choked village of St. Mary Mead, Jane Marple uncovers a chilling secret. An ancient evil, the Devourer, stirs beneath the well, fed by blood and betrayal. As shadows with glowing eyes stalk the night and a mysterious stranger weaves a deadly ritual, Miss Marple's wit and courage are her only weapons. With her family's cursed locket, she faces a choice: sacrifice her blood to seal the gate, or let the village become the Devourer's feast. Will she outsmart the darkness, or become its final victim? Chapter 1. The St. Mary Mead. Mystery. The fog clung to St. Mary Mead like a shroud, heavy and damp, as if the village itself were holding its breath. The narrow lanes lined with ivy-choked cottages and gnarled oaks seemed to pulse with a quiet unease, their shadows stretching unnaturally long in the dim glow of gas lamps. It was October, and the air carried the sharp bite of autumn laced with something else, something sour, like the faint whiff of decay. The villagers, tucked behind their lace curtains, whispered of strange happenings, doors creaking open without cause, footsteps echoing in empty alleys, and a low, guttural hum that seemed to rise from the earth itself at midnight. St. Mary Mead, a place of quaint charm by day, was unraveling into something sinister by night. Jane Marple, known to all as Miss Marple, sat by her parlor window, her knitting, needles clicking in a steady rhythm that belied the storm of thoughts in her mind. At 72, her sharp eyes missed nothing, not the flicker of a curtain across the lane, nor the way the postman's steps had quickened these past weeks, as if he feared lingering too long in the open. Her cottage, Rosehaven, was a relic of simpler times, its walls adorned with faded photographs and shelves of well-worn books. But tonight, the warmth of her hearth did little to dispel the chill that had settled in her bones. She had lived in St. Mary Mead her entire life, and she knew its rhythms as well as her own heartbeat. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. The trouble had begun 3 weeks ago, though no one could pinpoint exactly when the village had tipped into dread. It started with small things. Mrs. Harrow's cat, Muffin, found gutted in the churchyard, its eyes wide and glassy as if it had seen something unspeakable. Then came the disappearance of young Tommy Pierce, the butcher's apprentice, who had last been seen whistling down Gossington Lane at dusk. His cap was found the next morning, half buried in the mud near the old well, stained with something dark and viscous that no one dared name. The police from Much Benham had combed the area, their faces grim, but found no trace of the boy. The villagers spoke in hushed tones of accidents, of wandering off, but Miss Marple knew better. She had seen the way the earth around the well seemed disturbed not by boots but by something that dragged and slithered. She set her knitting aside and adjusted her spectacles, her gaze drifting to the window. The fog pressed against the glass, thick as porridge, obscuring the lane beyond. It was nearly 9 o'clock, and the village was unnaturally still. No laughter from the Blue Boar Inn, no clatter of hooves from late-night deliveries. Even the church bell, which tolled faithfully every evening, had fallen silent 2 nights ago, as if the vicar himself feared drawing attention to the house of God. Miss Marple's fingers twitched, not from cold, but from the nagging sense that the village was waiting for something to emerge from the fog. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. She froze, her heart giving a single heavy thud. Visitors were rare after dark, especially now. The knock came again, more insistent, followed by a voice, low, trembling, and unmistakably familiar. "Miss Marple? Are you there? Please, I need to speak with you." She rose, smoothing her skirt, and crossed to the door, her steps deliberate. She was not a woman prone to fear, but the air tonight felt wrong, as if it carried a weight that pressed against her chest. She opened the door to find Clara Henshaw, the postmistress, standing on her doorstep. Clara was a stout woman in her 50s, with a ruddy face and eyes that usually sparkled with gossip. Tonight, those eyes were wide with terror, her hands clutching a crumpled envelope. "Clara, whatever is the matter?" Miss Marple asked, ushering her inside. The postmistress's coat was damp, her hair plastered to her forehead as if she'd run through the fog. "It's this," Clara whispered, thrusting the envelope into Miss Marple's hands. "I found it in the sorting room, but it wasn't. There this morning, I swear it, Miss Marple, it just appeared. Miss Marple examined the envelope. It was yellowed, the edges frayed as if it had been buried for years. Her name was scrawled across the front in a spidery hand, the ink smudged but legible. Miss Jane Marple, Rosehaven Cottage, St. Mary Mead. There was no stamp, no postmark, no return address. She turned it over, noting a faint stain on the back, brownish, like dried blood. "Did you open it?" she asked, her voice calm but her mind racing. Clara shook her head vigorously. "I didn't dare. There's something wrong about it. I felt it the moment I touched it, like it was watching me." She shivered, pulling her coat tighter. "And there's more. When I found it, the sorting room was cold, colder than it should have been. And I heard something. A whisper, like someone was standing right behind me, but no one was there." Miss Marple's lips pressed into a thin line. She had heard similar stories these past weeks. Whispers, shadows, things that moved just out of sight. She gestured for Clara to sit by the fire, but the postmistress refused, her eyes darting to the window as if expecting something to peer back. "I'll look into it," Miss Marple said, slipping the envelope into her cardigan pocket. "But you mustn't speak of this to anyone, Clara. Not yet. People are frightened enough." Clara nodded, though her hands trembled. "You'll be careful, won't you? Whatever's happening. It's not natural. I feel it in my bones." After Clara left, hurrying into the fog with a backward glance, Miss Marple locked the door and returned to her chair. She withdrew the envelope, her fingers hesitating before breaking the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, brittle and stained, as if it had been pulled from a grave. The words were written in the same spidery hand, the ink uneven, as if the writer had been shaking. "They are waking. The old blood calls. St. Mary Mead will drown in it. You cannot stop what has begun, Jane Marple, but you will try, and you will." See? The signature was a single initial. M. Miss Marple's breath caught. She knew no one in the village with that initial who would write such a thing. Her mind, sharp as ever, sifted through possibilities. Old grudges, village secrets, tales of the past that had long been buried. St. Mary Mead was a place of hidden histories, of families who had lived and died here for centuries, their sins buried in the churchyard or whispered in the shadows. She thought of the old well, where Tommy Pierce's cap had been found, and the stories her grandmother had told her as a child, stories of something ancient, something hungry, that lived beneath the village. She set the letter down and rose, crossing to her bookshelf. Among the novels and gardening manuals was a small leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. It had belonged to her great-aunt Eliza Marple, who had been the village's unofficial historian until her death in 1885. Miss Marple had read it only once as a young woman, dismissing its tales as fanciful. Now she wasn't so sure. She opened it to a page marked with a ribbon, her eyes scanning the faded script. "The well is not a well. It is a door, and what lies beyond must never be woken." Her great-aunt had written of a ritual performed by the village elders in 1793 to seal something beneath the earth. The details were vague, written in a hurried hand, but there was mention of blood, of chance, of a pact that bound St. Mary Mead to silence. Miss Marple closed the journal, her heart pounding. She had always trusted her instincts, and they were screaming now, screaming that the letter, the disappearances, the whispers in the fog were connected to something older than the village itself. She moved to the window, peering into the fog. It seemed thicker now, almost alive, swirling in patterns that defied the wind. And then she saw it, a shape, vague and indistinct, moving through the mist. It was tall, too tall, its limbs unnaturally long, its movements jerky as if it were learning to walk. It paused at the edge of her garden, its head, if it had a head, tilting as if it sensed her watching. Miss Marple's breath fogged the glass, her fingers tightening on the curtain. The shape lingered for a moment, then melted into the fog, leaving only the echo of that low, guttural hum she had heard described by others. She stepped back, her mind racing. The letter had warned that she would try to stop whatever was coming, and she would. She had faced mysteries before, murders, thefts, betrayals. But this was different. This was not a puzzle of human greed or malice. This was something that crawled from the dark places of the world, something that had been waiting, patient and ravenous for centuries. The clock struck 10, its chime jarring in the silence. Miss Marple returned to her chair, the letter still in her hand. She would not sleep tonight. She would read her great-aunt's journal, page by page, and she would listen to the village, listen to its secrets, its fears, its whispers. The fog might hide the truth, but Jane Marple had never been one to shy away from shadows. Whatever was waking in St. Mary Mead, she would face it, and she would not face it alone. But as she opened the journal again, a sound came from outside, a scream, high and piercing, cut off abruptly. It came from the direction of the old well. Miss Marple's knitting needles stilled, her eyes narrowing. The mystery of St. Mary Mead had begun, and it was a mystery that bled. Chapter 2. An unsettling arrival. The scream from the night before lingered in Jane Marple's mind like a splinter, sharp and impossible to ignore. It had come from the direction of the old well, a jagged cry that ended too soon, swallowed by the fog that blanketed St. Mary Mead. By the time Miss Marple had donned her coat and ventured into the mist, lantern in hand, there was nothing to find. No body, no tracks, only the oppressive silence of a village holding its secrets close. The well, half hidden by brambles and moss, stood silent, its stone rim slick with dew or something darker. She had stood there for a long moment, her breath clouding in the cold, feeling the weight of unseen eyes. Whatever had screamed was gone, but the air felt heavier, as if the village itself were watching, waiting. By morning, the fog had thinned but not lifted, leaving St. Mary Mead draped in a gray haze that muted the colors of the cottages and dulled the church spire's gleam. Miss Marple sat at her kitchen table, the mysterious letter from Clara Henshaw spread before her. Its words, "They are waking." The old blood calls, burning in her mind. Her great-aunt's journal lay open beside it, its cryptic warnings about the well and the door beneath the village circling her thoughts. She had spent the night poring over its pages, finding fragments of folklore, tales of sacrifices made in the 1700s, of villagers who vanished after speaking of shadows that moved without light. Each entry felt like a piece of a puzzle, but the picture remained maddeningly incomplete. A knock at the door startled her, softer than Clara's frantic rapping the night before, but no less urgent. Miss Marple smoothed her skirt, her senses sharp, and opened the door to find Reverend Clement the vicar standing on her doorstep. His face, usually ruddy with good humor, was pale, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. Behind him stood a stranger, a man in a dark overcoat, his hat pulled low, his features obscured by the brim. The air around him seemed to hum, a faint vibration that made Miss Marple's skin prickle. "Good morning, Miss Marple," the vicar said, his voice strained. "I hope we're not intruding. This is Mr. Gideon Blackwood. He's new to the village, arrived on the dawn train." Miss Marple's eyes flicked to the stranger. He was tall, gaunt, with a face like carved ivory, sharp cheekbones, deep-set eyes that gleamed like polished obsidian, and a mouth that seemed to hold a secret smile. His coat was immaculate, but the hem was damp, as if he'd walked through wet grass or worse. He tipped his hat, revealing a shock of silver hair, though he couldn't have been older than 40. "A pleasure, Miss Marple," Blackwood said, his voice smooth as oil with an accent she couldn't place, neither local nor entirely foreign. "I've heard you're the heart of St. Mary Mead, a woman who sees what others miss." Miss Marple smiled politely, but her mind was racing. She didn't trust flattery, and there was something about Blackwood that set her nerves on edge, a stillness like a predator waiting to strike. "You're very kind, Mr. Blackwood, but I'm just an old woman who enjoys her knitting. What brings you to our little village?" The vicar glanced nervously at Blackwood, as if seeking permission to speak. "Mr. Blackwood is a historian," he said quickly. "He's come to study the church records. Old documents, you know. He's particularly interested in the history of the village." "Indeed," Blackwood said, his eyes never leaving Miss Marple's. St. Mary Mead has a rich past, stories of forgotten rituals, ancient pacts. I believe there's much to uncover here. Miss Marple's fingers tightened on the doorframe. The word pacts echoed her great-aunt's journal, too, closely for comfort. She invited them in, her hospitality automatic but her suspicion razor-sharp. As they settled in the parlor, she noted Blackwood's movements, deliberate, almost too graceful, as if he were conscious of every step. He declined tea, his gaze drifting to the bookshelf where her great-aunt's journal lay, now closed. The vicar, by contrast, fidgeted, his hands twisting the brim of his hat. "Reverend, you seem troubled," Miss Marple said, pouring tea for herself and the vicar. "Is it the scream we heard last night? I fear it's unsettled the village." The vicar flinched, nearly spilling his tea. "You heard it too? I hoped it was just a fox. But it came from the well, didn't it? I went out after, but there was nothing. Just that awful feeling like something was watching." Blackwood leaned forward, his eyes glinting. "The well, you say? Fascinating. I've read it's an old site, perhaps pre-Christian. Some villages built over such places to tame them or hide them." Miss Marple's smile didn't waver, but her mind catalogued his words. He knew too much for a stranger, and his arrival, so soon after the letter and the scream, felt like no coincidence. She steered the conversation to lighter topics, village gossip, the harvest festival, but her eyes never left Blackwood. He spoke little, yet every word seemed chosen, weighted, as if he were testing her. The vicar, meanwhile, grew more agitated, muttering about locked church doors opening on their own and candles extinguishing without cause. As they left, Blackwood paused at the door, his gaze locking with hers. "Be careful, Miss Marple," he said softly. "Some histories are better left buried, but I suspect you already know that." The door closed and Miss Marple stood motionless, the weight of his words settling like damp fog. She returned to the journal, flipping to a page she hadn't reached the night before. Her great-aunt had written of a keeper, a figure who appeared when the village was in peril, not to save it but to ensure the old pacts were honored. The description was vague, tall, pale, with eyes that saw too much, but it matched Blackwood unsettlingly well. The day passed in a blur of routine, knitting, tending her roses, but Miss Marple's thoughts were elsewhere. She visited the village shop where Mrs. Price, the shopkeeper, whispered of more strangeness. Milk curdling overnight, mirrors cracking without cause. At the Blue Boar, old Mr. Higgs swore he'd seen a figure by the well at midnight. Tall as a steeple, with limbs that bent wrong. Each story tightened the knot in Miss Marple's chest. The village was unraveling, and Blackwood's arrival felt like the pull of a thread. That evening, she attended a village meeting at the church, called by the vicar to address the growing fear. The pews were packed, faces pale and drawn, Mrs. Harrow still grieving her cat, the butcher hollow-eyed over Tommy's disappearance, Clara Henshaw clutching her shawl as if it could shield her from the dread. The vicar spoke of unity, of prayer, but his words faltered as a cold draft swept through the church, snuffing out the candles. A murmur rippled through the crowd, and Miss Marple's eyes darted to the back, where Blackwood stood, half hidden in shadow, his face unreadable as the meeting ended. She lingered, watching Blackwood slip out a side door. She followed at a distance, her steps muffled by the fog that had returned with the night. He moved toward the well, his silhouette blurring in the mist. She hid behind a yew tree, her heart pounding as he knelt by the well's edge, his hands tracing the stones. A low hum rose from the ground, the same guttural sound she'd heard the night before. Blackwood's lips moved, whispering words she couldn't hear, and the air grew colder, heavier, as if the earth itself were exhaling. Then, from the well, came a sound, a wet, scraping noise like something dragging itself upward. Miss Marple's breath caught as a shape emerged, not from the well but from the fog behind Blackwood. It was tall, its limbs impossibly long, its form flickering like a flame in the wind. Blackwood didn't turn, but his whispering grew louder, urgent. The shape hovered, then retreated, melting into the mist as if called back. Blackwood stood, brushing his hands as if finishing a task, and vanished into the fog. Miss Marple returned, home, her mind a storm of questions. Blackwood was no historian. He was something else, something tied to the well, the letter, the waking horror beneath St. Mary Mead. She locked her door, her hands trembling as she opened the journal again. A new page caught her eye, written in a shakier hand. The keeper comes when the door opens. He speaks to the shadows, and they listen. But beware, he is not their master. As she read, a sound came from outside, a soft, deliberate scratch at her door. Not a knock, but a clawing, slow and deliberate. Her lantern flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to writhe. The scratching stopped, replaced by a whisper, faint but clear. "Jane." She froze, her heart a drum in her chest. The voice was not human, not entirely. It was layered, as if many spoke at once, hungry and ancient. Miss Marple clutched the journal, her resolve hardening. Whatever Blackwood was, whatever lurked in the fog, she would face it. St. Mary Mead was her home, and she would not let it drown in shadows. But as she moved to the window, the fog pressed closer, and in its depths she saw them, eyes, too many to count, glowing like embers watching her. Chapter 3. Tea and Suspicion. The morning after the scratching at her door, Jane Marple woke to a silence that felt like a held breath. The fog had retreated, leaving St. Mary Mead bathed in a pale, watery sunlight that did little to warm the chill in her bones. Her cottage, Rosehaven, usually a haven of comfort, seemed diminished, its walls too thin to keep out the memory of that whispered voice. Jane, layered and hungry, as if the fog itself had spoken. She had not slept after the sound, faded instead, spending the night with her great-aunt's journal, its pages a labyrinth of warnings and half-told truths. The entry about the keeper haunted her, its description of a figure who spoke to the shadows aligning too closely with Gideon Blackwood's behavior at the well. Yet the journal offered no answers, only questions, and the letter from Clara Henshaw. "They are waking." The old blood calls lay on her table like a taunt. Miss Marple resolved to act. St. Mary Mead was unraveling, its people gripped by fear, and she would not sit idly by while shadows crept closer. She invited 3 trusted villagers for tea. That afternoon, Clara Henshaw, the postmistress who had brought the letter, Mrs. Agnes Price, the shopkeeper who had spoken of curdling milk and cracking mirrors, and Dr. Haydock, the village physician whose steady hands and sharp mind had seen every birth and death in St. Mary Mead for 30 years. They were her allies, her eyes and ears, and she needed their perspectives to piece together the growing horror. But as she prepared her parlor, setting out her best bone china and a plate of scones, she could not shake the feeling that the village was watching, waiting for her next move. The clock struck 3, and her guests arrived, their faces etched, with the same unease that had settled over St. Mary Mead. Clara was pale, her hands fidgeting with a handkerchief, her eyes darting to the windows as if expecting to see something pressed against the glass. Agnes, usually voluble with gossip, was subdued, her apron stained with what looked like ink but smelled faintly of rot. Dr. Haydock, a wiry man with a perpetual frown, carried a leather bag that clinked softly, as if filled with more than medical instruments. They settled around the table, the clink of teacups unnaturally loud in the tense silence. "Thank you for coming," Miss Marple began, pouring tea with a steady hand. "I know these are troubling times. The scream by the well, Tommy Pierce's disappearance, the oddities we've all noticed. I thought we might share what we know. Perhaps together we can make sense of it." Clara spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's that letter, Miss Marple. I can't stop thinking about it. After I left your cottage, I heard something following me home. Footsteps, but not right. Too slow, too heavy. And when I looked back, there was nothing but fog." She shuddered, clutching her teacup. "I haven't slept since. Every time I close my eyes, I hear that whisper again, like it's inside my head." Agnes nodded, her lips tight. It's not just the fog, my shop's been wrong. The milk curdles before it's opened, and yesterday a whole shelf of jars fell, shattered, all at once, with no one near. And the mirrors, they don't reflect right. I saw my face, but it wasn't me. The eyes were wrong, too big, too dark. She hesitated, then leaned forward. I think it's the well. My gran used to say it was cursed, that the old folks sealed something down there. I thought it was nonsense, but now... Dr. Haydock cleared his throat, his voice gruff. I've seen things, too. Patients coming in with nightmares all the same, dark shapes, voices calling their names. And the injuries, cuts that won't heal like they're infected with something that isn't natural. I autopsied Mrs. Harrow's cat. The wounds weren't from a fox or a dog. They were precise, like something carved it up with intent. He opened his bag, pulling out a small vial filled with a dark, viscous liquid. This was in its stomach, not blood, not bile. I don't know what it is, but it moves when you're not looking. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed as she took the vial, holding it to the light. The liquid inside seemed to writhe, sluggish and alive, catching the sunlight in a way that made her skin crawl. She set it down carefully, her mind racing. The journal had mentioned old blood, and now this. The pieces were connecting, but the picture was still obscured, like a shape in the fog. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door, sharp, insistent, and uninvited. The group froze, teacups halfway to lips, eyes meeting in silent alarm. Miss Marple rose, her heart steady despite the prickle of dread. She opened the door to find Gideon Blackwood, his dark coat pristine despite the muddy lanes, his smile as sharp as a blade. "Good afternoon, Miss Marple," he said, his voice smooth and unnervingly calm. "I heard you were hosting a gathering. May I join? I have insights into the village's troubles." The air in the room shifted as if the temperature had dropped. Clara's hands trembled, spilling tea, while Agnes's face drained of color. Dr. Haydock's frown deepened, his hand inching toward his bag. Miss Marple's smile was polite, but her eyes were steel. "Of course, Mr. Blackwood. Do come in. We were just discussing the recent strangeness." Blackwood settled into a chair, his presence filling the parlor like a shadow. He declined tea, his eyes scanning the group, lingering on the vial of dark liquid. "You've been busy, I see," he said, his tone light but laced with something darker. "The village is full of stories, isn't it? Whispers, shadows, things that go bump in the night, but stories have roots, and St. Mary Mead's roots run deep. What do you know of it?" Miss Marple asked, her voice mild but probing. She watched his every move, noting the way his fingers twitched, as if itching to touch something unseen. Blackwood leaned back, his smile widening. "I know this village is old, older than the church, older than the records. There are things buried here, things that don't stay buried. The well, for instance. It's not just a well, is it? It's a marker, a seal, and seals can break." Clara gasped, her handkerchief twisting into knots. "You know about the well? How? You've only been here a day." Blackwood's eyes gleamed. "I study history, Miss Henshaw, the kind that's written in blood, not ink. St. Mary Mead has a debt, and it's coming due. You've all felt it, the fog, the whispers, the things you see from the corner of your eye. They're waking because they've been called." "Called by whom?" Dr. Haydock snapped, his voice sharp. "You talk like you know more than you're saying. If you've got answers, spit them out." Blackwood's smile didn't falter, but his eyes darkened, like pools of ink. "Patience, Doctor. Answers come at a cost, but I'll give you this. The well is a door, and something on the other side is knocking. You can't stop it, but you can choose how you face it." The room fell silent, the weight of his words pressing down like the fog outside. Miss Marple's mind churned, piecing together fragments. The letter, the journal, Blackwood's whispers at the well, the shape in the fog. He was no historian, she was certain now. He was something else, perhaps the keeper her great-aunt had warned of, or something worse. But why had he come to her, to this gathering? Was he testing her, or warning her? Before she could press him, a sound shattered the silence. A low, guttural hum, rising from the ground beneath the cottage. The teacups rattled, the vial of dark liquid vibrating on the table. Agnes screamed, clutching her ears while Clara whispered prayers. Dr. Haydock grabbed his bag, his face pale. Blackwood alone seemed unfazed, his eyes locked on Miss Marple, as if gauging her reaction. The hum grew louder, a chorus of voices that weren't voices, speaking words that weren't words. The air grew heavy, thick with the smell of earth and decay. Miss Marple stood, her heart pounding but her resolve unshaken. She moved to the window, peering into the street. The fog had returned, thicker than ever, and in its depths, she saw them shapes too many to count, moving with that same jerky, unnatural gait she'd seen by the well. They circled the cottage, their forms indistinct but their presence undeniable, their eyes glowing like embers. "Get away from the window," Agnes cried, her voice breaking. "They'll see you." "They already have," Blackwood said softly, rising to his feet. "They see everything, Miss Marple, and they know you're looking back." He left without another word, slipping into the fog as if it welcomed him. The hum faded, but the shapes remained, lingering just beyond the glass. Miss Marple turned to her guests, her voice calm despite the terror clawing at her chest. "We need to know more about the well, the village, Blackwood. Whatever is happening, it's centered here, in St. Mary Mead, and we will face it together." But, as she spoke, the vial on the table tipped over, unprompted, its dark liquid spilling across the cloth, forming patterns that looked disturbingly like words. "You will see." Chapter 4. The hidden motive. The spilled liquid from Dr. Haydock's vial lingered on Miss Marple's tablecloth. Its dark, writhing patterns burned into her memory. The words it formed, "you will see," had dissolved into a shapeless stain by the time her guests left, but the message clung to her like damp fog. Clara Henshaw had fled, muttering prayers, while Agnes Price clutched her shawl and whispered of curses. Dr. Haydock, ever practical, had sealed the vial and promised to analyze the liquid further. Though his eyes betrayed a fear that no science could quell, Miss Marple had watched them disappear into the fog, their silhouettes swallowed by the gray, and felt the weight of St. Mary Mead's secrets pressing heavier than ever. By morning, the village seemed to hold its breath. The fog had thinned to a ghostly veil revealing the familiar outlines of cottages and hedgerows, but the air was wrong, thick with the scent of wet earth and something sharper, like iron or blood. Miss Marple sat in her parlor, her great-aunt's journal open before her, its pages a map to a past she was only beginning to understand. The entries spoke of a pact sealed in 1793, of blood spilled to keep something beneath the well dormant. But one phrase stood out, written in a trembling hand. "The keeper is not their master but their servant. He comes to feed, not to bind." Gideon Blackwood's face flashed in her mind, his sharp smile, his knowing eyes, his whispers at the well. Was he the keeper or something else entirely? She resolved to uncover his motives. Blackwood's arrival, so neatly timed with the village's descent into terror, was no coincidence. His talk of history, of pacts and seals, suggested he knew more than he revealed, perhaps more than anyone in St. Mary Mead. But why had he come? To warn, to manipulate, or to unleash? Miss Marple's instincts, honed by years of unraveling human nature, told her that Blackwood was a key. But to what? Luck, she could not yet say. Her first step was the church where Blackwood had claimed to study records. She dressed carefully, her tweed coat and sturdy shoes a quiet armor, and tucked the journal into her handbag alongside the mysterious letter. The village was eerily quiet as she walked. The lanes empty, save for a stray dog that whimpered and fled when she approached. The church loomed ahead, its spire piercing the haze, its windows dark despite the morning light. The door creaked as she entered, the air inside cold and heavy, smelling of wax and old stone. Reverend Clement was at the altar, polishing candlesticks with a distracted air. His face lit up with relief at her arrival, but his hands trembled. "Miss Marple, thank God I didn't sleep a wink after last night." The hum, it came again louder from the crypt, and the records. "They're gone." "Gone?" Miss Marple's voice was calm, but her mind sharpened. The ones Mr. Blackwood was studying? The vicar nodded, his eyes wide. The old ones from the 1700s. Parish registers, tithe records, even some handwritten notes by the vicar from 1793. I left him alone with them yesterday, and this morning they're missing. The cabinet was locked, but the lock was melted, like it had been burned from the inside. Miss Marple's lips pressed into a thin line. She followed the vicar to the vestry, where a heavy oak cabinet stood against the wall. The lock was indeed ruined, its brass warped and blackened as if touched by an unnatural heat. The shelves inside were empty, save for a faint dusting of ash and a single scrap of paper, overlooked in haste. She picked it up, her fingers brushing against something cold and slick. The paper was brittle, its edges charred, and bore a single line in a familiar spidery hand. The debt must be paid. Her heart quickened. The handwriting matched the letter Clara had brought, the same M scrawled at the bottom. She tucked the scrap into her pocket, her mind racing. Blackwood had taken the records, but why? To hide the truth or to use it? And what was this debt the village owed? She left the church, promising the vicar she would look into it, and headed for the vicarage where Blackwood was staying as a guest. The fog thickened as she walked, curling around her ankles like a living thing. She heard whispers, not words, but fragments of sound, like breath against her ear. Jane. See? Her steps quickened, though she kept her composure, her eyes scanning the mist for those glowing embers she'd seen the night before. The shapes were there, just beyond sight, their presence a pressure against her skin. The vicarage was a squat, ivy-clad building, its windows shuttered as if to keep the world out. She knocked, and the door opened almost instantly, revealing Blackwood. He wore no coat, his shirt sleeves rolled up, revealing pale arms marked with faint, intricate scars, patterns that seemed to shift when she looked too long. His smile was as sharp as ever, but his eyes held a flicker of something new. Amusement, or perhaps hunger. "Miss Marple," he said, stepping aside. "I expected you sooner. Come to discuss history?" She entered, her senses alert. The vicarage. Parlor was dim, the air heavy with the scent of old books and something metallic. A table was covered with papers, not the church records, but maps, diagrams, and notes in a language she didn't recognize, all centered on a crude sketch of the well. Blackwood watched her closely as if gauging her reaction. "You've been busy, Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice mild. "The church records are missing. I don't suppose you know anything about that?" His smile widened, but he didn't answer directly. "Records are fragile things, Miss Marple. They crumble, they burn. But the truth they hold, that endures. St. Mary Mead has a debt, one it's ignored for too long. I'm here to see it paid." "And what is this debt?" she asked, her tone deceptively gentle. "You speak in riddles, but people are frightened. Tommy Pierce is missing, perhaps dead. If you know something, speak plainly." Blackwood's eyes darkened, and for a moment the room seemed to shrink, the walls pressing inward. "The debt is blood, Miss Marple, blood for blood. In 1793, the village elders made a pact to keep something at bay, something older than your church, older than your village. They spilled blood to seal it, but promises like that don't last forever. The well is stirring and it demands payment." Her mind flashed to the journal, to the ritual her great-aunt described. "And you? Are you here to pay this debt or to collect it?" He laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "I'm a facilitator, nothing more. The shadows choose their own path. But you, Miss Marple, you're a problem. You see too much, ask too many questions. They don't like that." The air grew colder, the metallic scent stronger. A low hum rose from the floor, the same guttural sound from the night before. The papers on the table trembled, and the sketch of the well seemed to pulse, its lines writhing like veins. Miss Marple's hand tightened on her handbag, where the journal and the letter rested. She felt the weight of unseen eyes, not just Blackwood's but others, watching from the shadows. Before she could respond, a scream tore through the vicarage. Not human, but animal, raw and agonized. It came from the garden. Blackwood's smile vanished and he moved with unnatural speed, crossing to the window. Miss Marple followed, her heart pounding. Outside, in the fog, lay a dog, the stray she'd seen earlier. Its body twisted, its throat torn open. But the wounds were wrong. Too clean, too deliberate, like the cat Dr. Haydock had described. And around it, the grass was blackened, forming a circle of symbols that matched the scars on Blackwood's arms. "They're impatient," Blackwood muttered, almost to himself. "They're closer than I thought." "Who?" Miss Marple demanded, her voice sharp. "What are they?" He turned, his face unreadable. "You'll see soon enough. But a word of advice, Miss Marple. Stop digging. Some doors, once opened, don't close." She left the vicarage, her mind a storm of questions. Blackwood was no mere servant of the shadows. He was orchestrating something, guiding it. The missing records, the symbols, the debt, they were pieces of a motive she couldn't yet grasp. As she walked back to Rosehaven, the fog thickened and the whispers returned, louder now, calling her name. She glanced back once, seeing Blackwood's silhouette in the vicarage window watching her. And behind him in the fog were the shapes, taller, clearer, their limbs bending in ways that defied nature. That night she locked her doors and windows, but the scratching returned, slower, more deliberate. The journal lay open, its pages fluttering without a breeze. A new entry caught her eye, one she hadn't noticed before, written in a hand that wasn't her great-aunt's. "The keeper lies. He serves the hunger, not the village. Beware the blood he offers." As the scratching grew louder, the fog pressed against her windows and the embers glowed brighter. Miss Marple knew one thing. Blackwood's motive was hidden, but it was tied to the well, to the shadows, to the debt. And she would uncover it, even if it meant facing the things that waited in the dark. Chapter 5. Footprints in the fog. The fog was a living thing in St. Mary Mead, a predator that coiled through the lanes and pressed against windows, carrying whispers that weren't quite words. Jane Marple woke to it again, thicker than ever, a gray wall that swallowed her garden and muted the dawn. The scratching at her door from the night before echoed in her mind, as did the journal's warning. The keeper lies. He serves the hunger, not the village. Gideon Blackwood's face loomed in her thoughts. His sharp smile, his scarred arms, the symbols around the dead dog that matched those scars. He was no historian, no mere visitor. He was a catalyst, stirring something ancient beneath the village, and Miss Marple was determined to uncover what. She dressed quickly, her movements precise despite the dread that clung to her like damp cloth. The journal, now a constant companion, was tucked into her handbag alongside the letter and the scrap of paper from the church. Each piece was a thread in the tapestry of St. Mary Mead's terror, and today she would follow a new one. The footprints she had glimpsed in the fog outside the vicarage, faint but unnatural, leading toward the well. They were not human, not entirely. Too long, too narrow, with an extra digit that pressed deeper into the earth. She had seen them only briefly before the fog closed in, but they were burned into her memory, a trail she could not ignore. The village was a ghost town as she stepped outside, the fog so dense she could barely see the gate at the end of her path. The air was heavy with the scent of decay, stronger now, like a wound left to fester. Her lantern cast a feeble glow, its light swallowed by the mist, but she moved with purpose toward Gossington Lane, where the well stood. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the crunch of her shoes on gravel, and faintly a rhythmic thud, like something heavy dragging itself through the fog. She paused, her heart quickening. The sound came from ahead, near the well. She tightened her grip on her handbag, wishing she had brought something sturdier than her knitting needles, and pressed forward. The well emerged from the fog, its stone rim slick and glistening as if it had been weeping. The ground around it was disturbed, the grass trampled, and there they were, the footprints. They circled the well, dozens of them, overlapping in a chaotic dance. Each print was long and narrow, with 6 toes instead of 5, the extra one unnaturally large, as if it bore the weight of something that walked upright but not human. Miss Marple knelt, her fingers hovering over the prints. The earth was cold, unnaturally so, and the prints were deep as if whatever made them was far heavier than a man. She traced one with her eyes, noting how it led away from the well, toward the churchyard. Her great-aunt's journal had called, "The well a door," and these footprints were proof that something had crossed through. But where had it gone and why? A rustle in the fog made her stand, her lantern swinging. The thudding sound returned, closer now, accompanied by a low hum, the same guttural chorus she had heard in her parlor. She turned slowly, her breath shallow, and saw a shape in the mist, tall and angular, its limbs bent at wrong angles. Its eyes glowed like embers, unblinking, fixed on her. For a moment she was frozen, the weight of its gaze pinning her like a moth. Then it moved, a jerky step that left another footprint in the mud and vanished into the fog. She exhaled, her heart pounding, and followed the trail. The footprints led through the churchyard, past weathered gravestones and yew trees that seemed to lean inward as if guarding secrets. The trail ended at the crypt, a low stone structure half buried in the earth, its iron door ajar. The vicar had mentioned the hum coming from here, and now Miss Marple felt it, a vibration that thrummed through her bones, making her teeth ache. She pushed the door open, the hinges screaming, and descended into the dark. The crypt was cold, the air thick with the smell of mold and something sharper like blood. Her lantern revealed stone walls carved with faded symbols, spirals, eyes, hands with 6 fingers. They matched the patterns around the dead dog, the scars on Blackwood's arms. At the center of the crypt was a stone slab, its surface stained, with dark glistening patches that moved faintly, like the liquid in Dr. Haydock's vial. And there, etched into the stone, was a single word: debts. Miss Marple's breath caught. The journal had spoken of a debt, of blood spilled to seal the well. This crypt was no mere resting place. It was a shrine, a ledger of the village's pact. She searched the shadows, her lantern catching glints of something wet on the walls, as if the stone itself were bleeding. A noise behind her, a soft, deliberate scrape, made her turn, but there was nothing, only the echo of her own breathing. She left the crypt, her mind racing. The footprints, the symbols, the word debts, they were clues, but to what? Blackwood's motives were still hidden, but his connection to the well and the shadows was undeniable. She needed more information, and she knew where to find it. The village's oldest resident, Mrs. Elspeth Grange, who lived in a crumbling cottage at the edge of St. Mary Mead. Elspeth was 93, half-blind, and rarely left her home, but her memory was a vault of village lore. If anyone knew of the pact, the well, or the keeper, it was her. The fog was thicker as Miss Marple made her way to Elspeth's cottage, the footprints fading into the mist. The cottage was a relic, its thatch sagging, its windows clouded with grime. Elspeth answered the door, her milky eyes staring past Miss Marple, her voice a cracked whisper. "Jane Marple, I knew you'd come. The village is talking, even if the people aren't." Inside the cottage was a maze of clutter. Old books, dried herbs, bottles filled with unidentifiable liquids. Elspeth sat by a fire that burned too low, her hands twisting a rosary. "You've seen them, haven't you?" she said. "The things in the fog. They've been here before, long ago. My mother told me, when the well stirs, the shadows walk." Miss Marple leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "What are they, Elspeth, and what does Gideon Blackwood want with them?" Elspeth's face tightened, her fingers stilling. "Blackwood. I knew that name would come again. Not him, but his kind. They come when the debt is due, when the blood runs thin. The well isn't just a well, Jane. It's a mouth, and it's hungry. In 1793, the elders fed it, gave it lives to keep it sleeping. But it's waking now, and Blackwood's here to open the door." "Why?" Miss Marple pressed. "What does he gain?" Elspeth's eyes, blind as they were, seemed to pierce her. "Power. The shadows give it, but they take more. He's not their master, he's their tool. And you, Jane, you're in their way. They know you're looking, And they don't like. A chill ran through Miss Marple, not from the cold but from the truth in Elspeth's words. She thought of the footprints, the crypt, the glowing eyes. The shadows were real and they were watching her. She thanked Elspeth and left, promising to return, but as she stepped into the fog she felt a shift, a presence, closer now, following her. The footprints reappeared, fresh and glistening, leading back to the well. She followed, her lantern trembling, and saw them, not one set but dozens, circling the well in a spiral. The hum was louder now, a chorus of voices that spoke no language she knew. And in the fog, the shapes were clearer, tall, emaciated, their limbs twisting like branches, their eyes burning. One stepped closer, its head tilting, and whispered her name. Jane. She stumbled back, her lantern falling, its light snuffed out. The fog closed in and the footprints seemed to multiply, surrounding her. Blackwood's voice echoed in her mind. Some doors once opened don't close. She ran, her heart a drum, knowing the shadows were behind her, their footsteps thudding in the dark. Chapter 6. A puzzle in the parlor. Jane Marple's heart still raced as she locked the door of Rosehaven Cottage behind her, the memory of the glowing eyes and thudding footsteps in the fog clinging to her like a second skin. The well, the footprints, the crypt's carved word, debts, and Elspeth Grange's warning about Gideon Blackwood swirled in her mind, a storm of clues that refused to settle. St. Mary Mead was no longer the quiet village of her youth. It was a battleground, and something ancient was waking beneath its surface. She had escaped the shadows by the well, but their whispers, Jane, followed her home, echoing in the silence of her parlor. The fog pressed against her windows, thicker than ever, its gray tendrils curling like fingers against the glass. Her lantern, dropped in her flight from the well, was lost, and the cottage was lit only by the flickering glow of her hearth. She set her handbag on the table, the journal and letter inside feeling heavier than their size warranted. Her knitting lay abandoned, the needles glinting like tiny blades in the firelight. She needed to think, to piece together the puzzle before the shadows came closer, and she was certain they would. As she lit a second lamp, a faint creak came from the parlor floorboards, not the usual settling of an old house, but a deliberate sound as if someone or something had shifted their weight. Miss Marple froze, her senses sharp. The cottage was locked, the windows bolted, yet the air felt wrong, charged with a presence that made her skin prickle. She turned slowly, her eyes scanning the room. The shadows cast by the lamp danced, stretching unnaturally long, and for a moment, she thought she saw a shape, tall, angular, with limbs that bent wrong, flicker in the corner, but when she blinked it was gone. Her gaze fell on the table where something new caught her eye. A small wooden box, no larger than a cigar case, sitting beside her teapot. It hadn't been there when she left for the well. Its surface was carved with the same spiraling symbols she'd seen in the crypt and on Blackwood's arms, and it emanated a faint hum, like the chorus she'd heard in the fog. Her heart thudded, but her hands were steady as she approached. The box was old, its wood blackened as if scorched, and its lid was sealed with a rusted clasp that looked ready to crumble. She hesitated, the journal's warning about the keeper, and the hunger ringing in her mind. This box was no accident. It was a message, a piece of the puzzle left for her to find. She fetched a letter opener, its blade gleaming, and carefully pried the clasp open. The lid creaked, releasing a puff of air that smelled of earth and decay. Inside was a bundle of papers, yellowed and brittle, tied with a cord that felt unnervingly like dried sinew. On top lay a single object, a small polished stone, black as obsidian, etched with a six-fingered hand. Miss Marple's breath caught. The stone pulsed faintly, warm to the touch as if it held a heartbeat. She set it aside and untied the papers, her fingers trembling not from fear but from the weight of discovery. The first sheet was a map of St. Mary Mead, but not as she knew it. The well was marked at the center, with lines radiating outward, like veins connecting to the church, the vicarage, and, chillingly, her own cottage. Notes in the margins, written in the same spidery hand as the letter, detailed a ritual. Blood at the well, blood at the heart, blood at the hearth. 3 to bind, 3 to wake. The other papers were fragments, letters, diary entries, a list of names from 1793, many crossed out in red ink that smelled faintly of iron. One entry stood out, dated October 31st, 1793. The pact is sealed. The village is safe, but the price is heavy. 3 lives given, 3 marks made. The keeper will return when the debt is called. Below it was a sketch of the well, surrounded by figures that were not human, their limbs too long, their eyes too large. Miss Marple's mind raced. The map, the ritual, the names, they pointed to a truth she had only begun to grasp. The well was the heart of the village's curse, and her cottage, marked on the map, was part of it. But why had the box appeared here now? Was it Blackwood taunting her, or something else guiding her toward answers, or a trap? A knock at the door shattered her thoughts, sharp and urgent. She closed the box, hiding it beneath a tablecloth, and crossed to the door, her letter opener still in hand. It was Dr. Haydock, his face ashen, his medical bag clutched tightly. "Jane, thank God you're all right," he said, stepping inside without invitation. "It's Clara. She's gone." "Gone?" Miss Marple's voice was steady, but her heart sank. "What happened?" Dr. Haydock collapsed into a chair, his hands shaking. "I went to check on her this morning. Her house was empty, the door wide open. There was blood on the floor, the walls, everywhere, and footprints like the ones you described by the well. They led out her back door and vanished into the fog." Miss Marple's mind flashed to the shapes in the mist, their glowing eyes. Clara, who had brought the letter, who had heard the whispers, was now another piece of the village's debt. "Did you find anything else?" she asked, her voice calm but urgent. He nodded, pulling a crumpled paper from his bag. It was another letter, identical in style to the one Clara had delivered, addressed to Miss Marple. The words were chilling. "You see too much. The heart must bleed. The debt grows." The signature was the same. Dr. Haydock watched her read, his eyes haunted. "There's more. I tested the liquid from the vial, the one from the cat. It's not organic, not entirely. It reacts to light, to sound, like it's alive. And when I left Clara's house, I heard it, the hum. It was coming from your cottage." Miss Marple's gaze darted to the box beneath the tablecloth. The hum was faint now, but it was there, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. She showed Dr. Haydock the box, the stone, the papers, and together they pored over them, piecing together the puzzle. The map suggested 3 locations. The well, the church, and her cottage were key to the ritual. The journal's mention of 3 to bind, 3 to wake implied a cycle, a pattern that was repeating now. Blackwood's role was unclear, but his presence at the well, his knowledge of the pact, made him central. As they worked, the fog outside thickened and the hum grew louder, vibrating through the floorboards. The lamp flickered, casting shadows that seemed to writhe. Dr. Haydock's face paled as he pointed to the wall, where the shadows formed a shape, a 6-fingered hand, its fingers stretching toward the box. Miss Marple grabbed the stone, its warmth burning her palm, and the shadow recoiled, the hum faltering. "We need to understand the ritual," she said, her voice firm despite the terror clawing at her. "The well, the church, my cottage, they're connected, and Blackwood is the key. We need to find him before the shadows take anyone else." But as she spoke, a new sound came, a slow, deliberate scratching at the window. The fog parted briefly, revealing a face, not Blackwood's but Clara's, her eyes black and empty, her mouth stretched in a scream that made no sound. Behind her, the shapes were closer, their embers glowing, their limbs reaching. The scratching became a pounding, and the stone in Miss Marple's hand pulsed faster, as if calling to them. She clutched the journal, her resolve hardening. The puzzle was here, in her parlor, and she would solve it, or die trying. Chapter 7. The Locked Study. The sight of Clara Henshaw's eyeless face in the fog, her silent scream framed by the glowing embers of the shadows, haunted Jane Marple as she stood in her parlor, the black stone from the mysterious box burning in her hand. The pounding at the window had stopped, but the air in Rosehaven Cottage was thick with dread, the hum from the box pulsing like a heartbeat. Dr. Haydock, pale and shaken, gripped his medical bag, his eyes darting to the shadows that seemed to writhe on the walls. The map, the papers, the six-fingered stone, they were pieces of a puzzle that pointed to a ritual, a debt, and Gideon Blackwood's sinister role. But the answers were incomplete, and Miss Marple knew they lay beyond her cottage, in a place she had avoided until now, the vicarage's locked study where Blackwood had been seen poring over stolen church records. "We must go to the vicarage," Miss Marple said, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. "Blackwood is hiding something there. The records he took, the symbols, the ritual, it's all connected. We need to see what he's left behind." Dr. Haydock nodded, though his hands trembled. "The vicarage. It's not safe, Jane. Not after what we saw. Clara's gone, and those things, they know we're looking." "They've always known," she replied, tucking the stone and papers into her handbag alongside her great-aunt's journal. "But we can't stop now. Clara's fate, Tommy Pierce's, the village's, they depend on us." The fog was a suffocating blanket as they stepped outside, the village swallowed in gray. The lanes were silent, the cottages dark, as if St. Mary Mead had been abandoned to the shadows. The hum followed them, faint but persistent, rising from the ground like a chorus of the damned. Miss Marple's lantern was gone, lost by the well, so they moved by the dim glow of Dr. Haydock's torch, its beam cutting through the mist but revealing little. Footprints, those unnatural six-toed marks, appeared and vanished in the mud, leading toward the vicarage. The air smelled of rot and iron, and the whispers returned, soft and insidious. "Jane, see." The vicarage loomed, ahead its ivy-clad walls barely visible in the fog. The front door was ajar, creaking in the wind, and the windows were black as if no light could penetrate. Miss Marple's heart thudded, but her resolve was iron. She pushed the door open, the hinges groaning, and stepped inside. Dr. Haydock, close behind. The parlor was as she'd seen it last, papers strewn across a table, maps and diagrams centered on the well, but the air was colder now, heavy with the metallic tang of blood. "Blackwood." Dr. Haydock called, his voice echoing. No answer came, only a faint scratching from upstairs. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. The study was on the second floor, a room the vicar had always kept locked, claiming it held old parish documents too, fragile for casual handling. Blackwood had been given access, and now, with the church records missing, it was the logical place to search. They climbed the stairs, the wood creaking underfoot, each step amplifying the hum that seemed to seep from the walls. The hallway was dark, the air thick with dust and something fouler. At the end was the study door, heavy oak with a brass lock that gleamed unnaturally, as if polished by unseen hands. Miss Marple tried the handle, locked, but the metal was warm, almost alive, pulsing faintly under her touch. Dr. Haydock produced a set of medical tools, including a slender probe. "I've picked a lock or two in my day," he muttered, working the mechanism. The lock resisted, then clicked. But, as it did, a low growl echoed from inside. Not human, not animal, but something that made the hair on Miss Marple's neck stand on end. The door swung open, revealing darkness so complete it seemed to swallow the torchlight. They stepped inside, the air colder than the fog outside, smelling of earth and decay. The study was small, lined with bookshelves, a desk at the center piled, with papers and artifacts. The stolen church records were there, scattered among maps and drawings of the well, the crypt, and, chillingly, Rosehaven Cottage. Symbols covered the walls, carved into the wood, glowing faintly with a sickly green light. Six-fingered hands, spirals, eyes that seemed to follow their movements. And on the desk, a single candle burned, its flame unnaturally still. casting shadows that moved independently of the light. Miss Marple approached the desk, her eyes scanning the papers. One was a ledger from 1793, listing names, villagers who had given to the pact. 3 names were circled in red: Eliza Marple, her great-aunt; Thomas Grange, likely Elspeth's ancestor; and Margaret Blackwood. Her breath caught. Blackwood. The name tied Gideon to the village's past, to the ritual, to the debt. Another paper detailed the ritual. 3 lives, 3 marks, 3 places. Blood at the well, the heart, the hearth. The keeper binds, but the hunger wakes. Dr. Haydock's hand shook as he pointed to a corner. "Jane, look." There, half hidden by a bookshelf, was a trapdoor, its edges etched with the same symbols. It was ajar, revealing a narrow staircase, descending into darkness. The hum was louder here, vibrating through the floor, and a faint glow pulsed from below, like the embers of the shadow's eyes. "We have to go down," Miss Marple said, though every instinct screamed against it. The trapdoor, the study, the symbols, they were a nexus, a key to Blackwood's motives and the village's curse. Dr. Haydock hesitated, then nodded, his torch trembling as they descended. The staircase was stone, slick with moisture, the air growing colder with each step. The walls were carved with more symbols, some weeping a dark viscous liquid that smelled of blood. At the bottom was a chamber, its floor dirt, its ceiling low and oppressive. At the center stood a stone altar, identical to the one in the crypt, stained with dark patches that moved like the liquid in Dr. Haydock's vial. And on the altar lay a body, Clara Henshaw, her eyes black and empty, her chest carved with a 6-fingered hand. Miss Marple stifled a gasp, her mind racing. Clara's body was fresh, the blood still wet, but the air around her shimmered as if something had just left. The hum was deafening now, a chorus of voices that spoke in tongues older than the village. Dr. Haydock clutched her arm, his face pale. "We need to leave, Jane. This isn't right." But before they could move, the trapdoor above slammed shut, the lock clicking with a finality that echoed like a gunshot. The hum surged and the shadows on the walls came alive, forming shapes, tall, angular, with limbs that bent wrong. Their eyes glowed and their whispers filled the chamber. "Jane. Blood. See?" Miss Marple clutched the journal, the stone, in her pocket burning against her hip. The puzzle was clearer now. Blackwood was no mere servant. He was feeding the shadows, using the village to fulfill the ritual. But why her cottage? Why her? As the shapes closed in, their claws scraping. The stone, she realized the locked study had been a trap, not for answers, but for her. Chapter 8. Whispers from the past. The air in the underground chamber beneath the vicarage was suffocating, thick with the stench of blood and decay, the hum of the shadows vibrating through Jane Marple's bones. The trapdoor above had slammed, shut, sealing her and Dr. Haydock in darkness with Clara Henshaw's lifeless body, its chest carved with a 6-fingered hand. The shadows, tall, angular, their limbs twisting unnaturally, closed in, their glowing eyes like embers in the gloom, their whispers a cacophony. "Jane. Blood. See?" The black stone in her pocket burned against her hip, pulsing in time with the hum as if it were alive, calling to the things that surrounded them. Miss Marple clutched her great-aunt's journal, her mind racing despite the terror that threatened to overwhelm her. The locked study had been a trap, and Gideon Blackwood had led her here, not to answers, but to the heart of the village's curse. Dr. Haydock's torch flickered, its beam weak against the oppressive dark. His face was pale, his hands trembling as he gripped his medical bag. "Jane, we need to get out," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Those things, they're not human. They'll kill us." "Not yet," Miss Marple said, her voice steady, though her heart pounded. "They want something from us, from me. We need to understand why." She scanned the chamber, her eyes adjusting to the faint green glow of the symbols carved into the walls. Spirals, eyes, 6-fingered hands. identical to those in the crypt and on Blackwood's arms. The altar, stained with Clara's blood, seemed to pulse, the dark liquid moving as if drawn by an unseen force. The journal's words echoed in her mind. The keeper lies. He serves the hunger. Blackwood had orchestrated this, but the shadows were not his to command. They were using him, just as they were using the village. The whispers grew louder, no longer a single voice but a chorus, layered and ancient, speaking in tongues that scraped against her mind. They weren't just calling her name now. They were telling a story, fragmented and disjointed, like memories torn from the earth. Miss Marple closed her eyes, forcing herself to listen, to parse the words from the noise. Images flickered in her mind, flashes of St. Mary Mead as it was centuries ago. Its lanes unpaved, its people gathered around the well under a blood-red moon. 3 figures stood out. A woman with her great-aunt's sharp eyes, a man with a face like Elspeth Grange's, and another cloaked with scars on her arms, Margaret Blackwood. The whispers spoke of 1793, of a ritual to seal the well, a door to something older than the village, something that fed on blood and fear. The elders had offered 3 lives, Eliza Marple, Thomas Grange, and Margaret Blackwood, not as sacrifices but as keepers, bound to the shadows to keep them dormant. But the pact was flawed, the whispers said. The shadows were patient, and the blood of the keepers thinned with time. Now they were waking, and Gideon Blackwood, a descendant of Margaret, had come to renew the pact or to break it. Miss Marple opened her eyes, the chamber snapping back into focus. The shadows were closer, their claws scraping the stone, their eyes burning into her. But they hadn't attacked. Not yet. The stone in her pocket pulsed faster, and she realized it was the key, a relic of the ritual, tying her to the pact through her great-aunt's blood. She pulled it out, its black surface gleaming, the 6-fingered hand etched into it glowing faintly. The shadows recoiled, their whispers sharpening into a hiss. "Dr. Haydock," she said, her voice calm but urgent. "The altar. Look at it." He turned, his torch illuminating the stone slab. Clara's body was still, but the blood had formed, new patterns, spiraling toward a small indentation at the altar's center, shaped like the stone in Miss Marple's hand. "It's a lock," she said, stepping forward. "The stone fits, it's part of the ritual." "Don't." Dr. Haydock grabbed her arm, his eyes wide. "If you use it, you could wake them fully, or worse." "We're already trapped," she countered. "The shadows are here. This stone, this altar. They're part of the pact. If we don't act, they will." She moved to the altar, the shadows parting reluctantly, their whispers a storm of protest. She placed the stone in the indentation, and it clicked into place, the hum surging to a deafening roar. The chamber shook, dust falling from the ceiling, and the trapdoor above groaned but didn't open. The whispers changed, no longer chaotic but clear, a single voice rising above the rest. Female, familiar, laced with pain. "Jane, you carry my blood. The debt is yours." It was Eliza Marple, her great-aunt, speaking from the past, her voice woven into the shadows. "The keeper betrayed us. He offers blood, but not his own. Find the heart. Find the hearth. Stop him before the door opens." The shadows lunged, their claws grazing Miss Marple's coat, but the stone's glow held them at bay. Dr. Haydock pulled her back, his torch swinging wildly. "We need to get out now," he shouted, as the chamber trembled again, cracks forming in the walls. The altar began to sink, revealing a tunnel beneath, its walls slick with the same dark liquid, leading deeper into the earth. Miss Marple grabbed the stone, yanking it free. The hum faltered, the shadows retreating, but the tunnel remained open, a yawning mouth that smelled of death. "We can't stay here," she said, her mind racing. Eliza's voice had given her a path. The heart, the hearth, the ritual's 3 places. The well was one, her cottage another. The church with its crypt must be the 3rd, and Blackwood was the key. Offering blood, Clara's, Tommy's, to feed the shadows. They scrambled up the staircase, the shadows hissing behind them. The trap door was still locked, but Dr. Haydock threw his weight against it, the wood splintering. They stumbled into the study, the air no less oppressive, the symbols on the walls pulsing faster. The papers on the desk were gone, replaced by a single note in Blackwood's precise hand. The debt is due. The heart bleeds. Come to the church, Jane. Miss Marple's blood ran cold. Blackwood knew she would come, knew she was unraveling the pact. The whispers followed them as they fled the vicarage, Eliza's voice mingling with the shadows. Find the heart. Stop him. The fog was a wall, the six-toed footprints fresh in the mud, leading toward the church. The village was silent, but the hum was everywhere, vibrating through the ground, the air, their bones. As they reached the churchyard, the fog parted, revealing Blackwood standing by the crypt, his coat billowing, his eyes gleaming like the shadows. You're persistent, Miss Marple, he called, his voice carrying over the hum. But the past is awake and it's hungry. Will you pay the debt or will you join it? The shadows emerged behind him, taller, clearer, their forms almost solid. Clara's face flickered among them, her black eyes pleading, her mouth moving, without sound. Miss Marple clutched the stone, its heat searing her palm, and knew the whispers from the past were her only guide. The heart, the hearth, the debt. She would face them, even if it meant facing Blackwood and the things he served. Chapter 9. The Missing Heirloom. The fog in St. Mary Mead was a living shroud, curling around Jane Marple's ankles as she stood in the churchyard, the black stone in her hand pulsing like a heartbeat. Gideon Blackwood's silhouette loomed by, the crypt, his eyes gleaming with the same unnatural light as the shadows that flanked him. Tall, angular figures with limbs that bent wrong, their glowing eyes fixed on her. Clara Henshaw's ghostly face flickered among them, her black, empty eyes a silent plea, her mouth forming words that never reached the air. The hum, that guttural chorus of ancient voices, vibrated through the ground, the air, her bones, carrying the whispers of her great-aunt Eliza. Find the heart. Stop him. Dr. Haydock gripped his torch, his face pale, as Blackwood's words echoed. Will you pay the debt, or will you join it? Miss Marple's mind raced, piecing together the puzzle. The well, the church, her cottage, the three places of the ritual, marked on the map from the mysterious box. The stone, etched with a six-fingered hand, was a key tied to the pact of 1793 that bound her great-aunt Eliza, Thomas Grange, and Margaret Blackwood to the shadows. But something was missing, a piece of the ritual that Blackwood sought, something that could either seal the well or open it fully. Her great-aunt's journal had hinted at an heirloom, a relic passed down through the Marple family, meant to guard against the hunger beneath the village. And now, with Blackwood's taunting note, the heart bleeds. Come to the church. She knew it was no coincidence. We need to return to Rosehaven, she said, her voice steady despite the shadow's gaze. There's something in my cottage, an heirloom, something Eliza left. It's part of this and Blackwood wants it. Dr. Haydock's eyes widened. Jane, we can't go back. Those things, they'll follow us. And Blackwood, he's not human, not anymore. He's human enough to fear me, she replied, clutching the stone. He's playing a game, but he's not in control. The shadows are using him, and they're afraid of what I might find. We go now. They fled the churchyard, the fog swallowing Blackwood's silhouette and the shadow's glowing eyes. The six-toed footprints trailed them, fresh in the mud, leading back toward Rosehaven. The whispers grew louder, Eliza's voice mingling with others. Thomas Grange, Margaret Blackwood, voices from 1793, pleading, warning, accusing. The heirloom. Guard it. He seeks it. Miss Marple's heart pounded, but her resolve was iron. The heirloom was the key, and she would find it before Blackwood did. Rosehaven Cottage was dark when they arrived, its windows black as if the fog had seeped. Inside, the door was locked, but the air felt violated as if something had passed through. Inside, the parlor was untouched. the mysterious box still hidden beneath the tablecloth, but the hum was louder, emanating from the walls, the floor, the hearth. Miss Marple's eyes darted to the fireplace, where the journal had mentioned the hearth as one of the ritual's 3 places. If the heirloom was here, it was tied to that. She knelt by the hearth, her fingers brushing the cold stone. The fireplace was old, built when the cottage was new, its bricks worn but sturdy. She pressed each one, searching for a hollow sound, a hidden compartment. Dr. Haydock stood guard, his torch sweeping the room, his breath ragged. "Hurry, Jane," he whispered. "I hear them. Outside." The scratching had returned, slow and deliberate, at the windows, the door. The fog pressed closer, shapes moving within it, their eyes glowing. Miss Marple's fingers found a loose brick, its edges etched with a faint spiral. She pried it free, revealing a small cavity. Inside was a velvet pouch, heavy and cold, tied with a cord that smelled of earth. She opened it, her hands trembling, and found a silver locket, its surface engraved with the same 6-fingered hand as the stone. It was heavy, unnaturally so, and when she opened it, a faint light spilled out, revealing a lock of hair, dark, streaked with gray, bound with a red thread. "Eliza's," she whispered, recognizing the hair from a description in the journal. The locket was the heirloom, a relic of the 1793 pact, imbued with the blood of the keepers. It pulsed in her hand, its light pushing back the shadows that had begun to seep through the walls. The hum faltered, the whispers turning to hisses of anger. Dr. Haydock's torch flickered, and he gasped. "Jane, the box, it's moving." The wooden box on the table was shaking, its symbols glowing green, the papers inside rustling as if caught in a wind. Miss Marple clutched the locket, its light flaring, and the box stilled, but the scratching outside grew frantic, the shadows pounding now, their claws splintering the wood of the door. "We need to protect this," she said, slipping the locket into her pocket beside the stone. "It's what Blackwood wants. It's part of the ritual. Blood at the hearth. My hearth." Before Dr. Haydock could respond, a crash came from upstairs, followed by a low growl that made the air vibrate. The hum surged, and the shadows broke through, their forms spilling into the parlor like ink, their eyes burning. Miss Marple grabbed the journal, her mind racing. The locket, the stone, the ritual, they were tied to her blood, to Eliza's, to the pact. Blackwood had taken Clara, Tommy, and now he wanted the heirloom to complete the ritual, to open the well fully. "Run!" she shouted, pulling Dr. Haydock toward the back door. They stumbled into the garden, the fog a wall, the shadows close behind. The 6-toed footprints were everywhere, circling the cottage, leading toward the well. And there in the distance stood Blackwood, his coat billowing, his arms raised as if conducting the fog itself. The locket burned in her pocket, its light pulsing, and Eliza's voice whispered again, "Guard the heirloom and stop him, the heart is next." Miss Marple knew the church was the heart, the final piece of the ritual. Blackwood was waiting, the shadows were gathering, and the heirloom was the key to either sealing the pact or unleashing the hunger beneath St. Mary Mead. As the shadows closed in, their claws gleaming, she ran, the locket's light her only guide in the dark. Chapter 10. Truth at twilight, the fog of St. Mary Mead clung to Jane Marple like a second skin as she and Dr. Haydock stumbled through the garden, the silver locket in her pocket pulsing with a light that cut through the gray. The shadows were close, their 6-toed claws scraping the earth, their glowing eyes burning through the mist. The hum, that guttural chorus of ancient voices, throbbed in the air, mingling with the whispers of her great-aunt Eliza. Guard the heirloom. The heart is next. Gideon Blackwood's silhouette loomed in the distance, his arms raised as if summoning the fog itself, his voice a low chant that made the ground tremble. The 6-toed footprints surrounded them, leading inexorably toward the church, the heart of the ritual, the final piece of the pact that bound St. Mary Mead to the hunger beneath the well. Miss Marple's breath came in sharp gasps, but her mind was a steel trap, sifting through the clues, the journal, the locket, the stone, the map, marking the well, her cottage, and the church. The ritual of 1793, blood at the well, the heart, the hearth, had sealed something ancient, with Eliza Marple, Thomas Grange, and Margaret Blackwood as its keepers. But the pact was fraying, and Gideon, a descendant of Margaret, was feeding the shadows with blood. Tommy Pierce's Clara Henshaw's to open the well fully. The locket with its lock of Eliza's hair was the heirloom meant to guard against the hunger, and Blackwood wanted it. The truth, Miss Marple knew, lay in the church where the shadows were gathering, and twilight was falling, casting St. Mary Mead in a blood-red glow. "Jane, we can't go to the church," Dr. Haydock panted, his torch flickering as they ran. "Blackwood's there, and those things, they'll tear us apart." "We have no choice," she replied, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. "The locket, the stone, they're tied to the pact. The church is the heart, and Blackwood's waiting. If we don't stop him, the village is lost." The church loomed ahead, its spire a jagged shadow against the twilight sky. The fog parted, revealing the crypt's open door, a black maw exhaling the hum. The footprints converged here, dozens of them, circling the churchyard like a noose. Blackwood stood at the crypt's entrance, his coat billowing, his scarred arms glowing with the same sickly green as the symbols in the vicarage study, his eyes locked on Miss Marple, his smile sharp as a blade. "You brought the locket," he said, his voice carrying over the hum. "Good. The heart demands it." Miss Marple clutched the locket, its light flaring, pushing back the shadows. That slunk closer. "What do you want with it, Gideon?" she demanded, stepping forward, Dr. Haydock at her side. "You're no keeper. You're feeding the shadows, betraying the pact your ancestor made." Blackwood laughed, a sound like shattering glass. "The pact was a lie, Jane. Eliza, Thomas, Margaret, they thought they could bind the hunger, but they only delayed it. The shadows are eternal, and they chose me to finish what began in 1793. The locket, the stone, your blood. They're the keys to open the door. St. Mary Mead will feed them, and I will be rewarded." "Rewarded?" Dr. Haydock snapped, his torch trembling. "You're sacrificing the village for power. You're mad." "Not mad," Blackwood said, his eyes gleaming. "Awake. The shadows speak, Doctor. They've always spoken, to those who listen. Your village was built on their altar, and the debt is due." He raised a hand, and the shadows surged, their claws gleaming, their whispers a storm. "Blood. Heart. Now." Miss Marple's hand tightened on the locket, its light burning her palm. Eliza's voice whispered again, clearer now. "The heart is the truth. Use the locket. Break the pact." She stepped toward the crypt, the stone in her other pocket pulsing in time with the locket. "You need my blood, don't you?" she said, her voice calm but piercing. "Because I'm Eliza's kin. The pact is in my veins, and you can't finish the ritual without me." Blackwood's smile faltered, his eyes narrowing. "Clever, Jane, but you're too late. The heart is bleeding, and the door is opening." He gestured to the crypt, where the hum was deafening, the ground trembling. A glow pulsed from within, red as blood, and Clara's ghostly face appeared, her black eyes pleading, joined by another. Tommy Pierce, his throat torn, his mouth moving in silent screams. Miss Marple entered the crypt, Dr. Haydock protesting but following, his torch barely piercing the dark. The altar from Chapter 7 was there, its surface slick with fresh blood, the six-fingered hand carved deeper, glowing with the same light as the locket. The walls pulsed, the symbols weeping dark liquid, and the shadows were everywhere. There, forms almost solid now, their claws scraping closer. Miss Marple opened the locket, its light flooding the crypt, and the shadows hissed, retreating. She placed it on the altar in an indentation matching the stones, and the hum surged, the ground shaking violently. Eliza's voice filled her mind, a torrent of memories. The ritual of 1793, the three keepers spilling their blood to seal the well, the shadows promising peace but demanding more. Margaret Blackwood had faltered, her blood tainted by ambition, weakening the pact. Gideon, her descendant, had been called by the shadows, promised power to betray the village. The locket, imbued with Eliza's blood, was the only thing that could break the pact, but it required a sacrifice. Blood at the heart. Miss Marple's hand trembled as she drew her letter opener, its blade glinting. "Jane, no!" Dr. Haydock shouted, but she was resolute. She pricked her finger, letting a drop of blood fall onto the locket. The light flared, blinding, and the shadows screamed, their forms unraveling. Blackwood lunged, his scarred arms outstretched, but the locket's light burned him, his skin blistering as he fell back, cursing. The altar cracked, the blood on its surface boiling away, and the hum faltered, replaced by a single clear voice. Eliza's. "You've done it, Jane." "The pact is broken, but the door is open." The crypt shook, stones falling, and a crack split the altar, revealing a void below, a darkness deeper than night, from which a single massive eye stared up, unblinking, ancient, hungry. Miss Marple grabbed the locket, yanking it free, and pulled Dr. Haydock toward the crypt's entrance. Blackwood was gone, vanished into the fog, but the shadows were reforming, their eyes brighter, their claws longer. The truth was clear. The pact was broken, but the shadows were free, and the well was no longer sealed. As they fled into the twilight, the fog alive with whispers, Miss Marple knew the village's secret was next, and it would demand everything she had left. Chapter 11. The Village Secret. The twilight over St. Mary Mead had bled into a sickly purple, the fog a writhing mass that pulsed with the shadow's hunger. Jane Marple clutched the silver locket, its light dimming but still warm in her hand, as she and Dr. Haydock stumbled from the church crypt, the ground trembling beneath them. The massive eye in the void below the altar, ancient, unblinking, impossibly alive, burned in her mind, a testament to the horror she had unleashed. The Pact of 1793, forged by her great-aunt Eliza, Thomas Grange, and Margaret Blackwood, was broken. But the shadows were free, their six-toed claws scraping the earth, their glowing eyes multiplying in the fog. Gideon Blackwood had vanished, but his chant lingered, a taunt that the debt of St. Mary Mead was far from paid. The village was no longer a village. It was a graveyard, its lanes empty, its cottages dark, the hum of the shadows a constant drone that rattled windows and teeth. The six-toed footprints crisscrossed the mud, leading everywhere and nowhere, a web that ensnared the entire town. Miss Marple's breath came in sharp bursts, but her mind was a blade, cutting through the terror to the truth. The locket, the stone, the ritual. They were tied to the village's secret, a truth buried deeper than the well, older than the church. Eliza's whispers had guided her this far. The heart is the truth. The village hides it. And now, with the shadows unleashed, Miss Marple knew she had to uncover it before St. Mary Mead drowned in blood. "We can't go back to Rosehaven," Dr. Haydock said, his voice ragged, his torch flickering as they reached the churchyard's edge. "The shadows, they're everywhere. And that thing in the crypt. Jane, what have we done?" "We've broken the pact," she replied, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. "But the shadows were waking before I touched the locket. Blackwood planned this. He used Clara, Tommy, me. The village's secret is what he's after, and it's tied to the well. We need to find Elspeth Grange. She knows more than she's told." The fog thickened as they moved toward Elspeth's cottage at the village's edge, the hum growing louder, the whispers sharper. "Jane. Blood. Ours." The locket pulsed faintly, its light a fragile shield against the shapes that slunk through. The mist, tall, angular, their limbs bending like broken branches, their eyes like burning coals. Clara's face flickered among them, joined by Tommy Pierce, their ghostly forms weaving through the shadows, their mouths moving in silent screams. Dr. Haydock's torch caught glints of their claws, gleaming wetly, as if freshly bloodied. Elspeth's cottage was a crumbling relic, its thatch sagging, its windows clouded with grime. The door was ajar, swinging in the wind, and the air inside was heavy with the smell of herbs and rot. Elspeth sat by her dying fire, her milky eyes staring into nothing, her hands still clutching her rosary. "You're late, Jane," she said, her voice a cracked whisper. "The secret's out. The well's open and the village is theirs." Miss Marple knelt beside her, the locket warm in her hand. "Elspeth, tell me the truth. What is the village's secret? The pact, the well, the shadows. What are they hiding?" Elspeth's blind eyes seemed to focus, her voice dropping to a hiss. The village was built on a lie. St. Mary Mead isn't a village, it's a cage. The well isn't a well. It's a mouth, a gate to something older than time. The elders of 1793, your Eliza, my Thomas, Margaret Blackwood, they didn't just seal it. They built the village to hide it, to guard it. Every family here, every stone, every blade of grass, it's all part of the prison. But the shadows remember, Jane. They want out, and Blackwood's giving them the key. Miss Marple's heart sank, the pieces falling into place. The map from the box marking the well, the church, her cottage. It wasn't just a ritual. It was a blueprint of the village's purpose. The locket, the stone, her blood, they were anchors meant to keep the gate closed. But Blackwood, descended from Margaret, had betrayed that purpose, offering blood to weaken the prison, to free the thing beneath the well, that massive, unblinking eye. "What is it?" Dr. Haydock asked, his voice trembling. "What's in the well?" Elspeth's rosary snapped, beads scattering across the floor. "The Devourer," she whispered. "It's not a god, not a demon, just hunger, pure and endless. The elders bound it with their blood, but it feeds on fear, on lives. Blackwood's feeding it, waking it. And you, Jane, you're the last of Eliza's line. Your blood can close the gate or open it forever." The hum surged, the cottage shaking, and the fog outside erupted with shapes. Dozens now, their claws tearing at the walls, their eyes blazing. Elspeth screamed, her voice cut off as a shadow lunged through the window, its claws sinking into her chest. Her body crumpled, blood pooling, forming the same six-fingered hand. Miss Marple grabbed Dr. Haydock, pulling him toward the back door as the shadows poured in, their whispers a roar. "Jane, yours. Now." They ran, the locket's light flickering, the stone burning in her pocket. The footprints led back to the well, the heart of the village's secret. Blackwood was there, standing on the rim, his arms outstretched, his scars glowing green. The fog parted, revealing the well's depths, a void, pulsing with red light, the massive eye staring up, its pupil dilating as if it saw her. "You can't stop it, Jane," Blackwood shouted, his voice ecstatic. "The Devourer wakes and St. Mary Mead is its feast." Miss Marple's hand tightened on the locket, Eliza's voice clear in her mind. "Your blood, the gate. Choose." The village's secret was laid bare. St. Mary Mead was a prison for an ancient hunger, and her blood, as Eliza's heir, was the final key. She could seal the gate, but it would demand a sacrifice, her life or the village's. As the shadows closed in, their claws gleaming, the well's hum shaking the earth, she knew the choice was hers and twilight was running out. Chapter 12. A case closed. The fog over St. Mary Mead was a suffocating veil, alive with the writhing forms of the shadows, their six-toed claws tearing at the earth, their glowing eyes like embers in the twilight's dying light. Jane Marple stood before the well, the silver locket in one hand, the black stone in the other, both pulsing with a heat that seared her palms. The hum from the well was a deafening roar, shaking the ground, as the massive, unblinking eye of the Devourer stared, up from its depths, its pupil dilating with hunger. Gideon Blackwood stood on the well's rim, his scarred arms glowing green, his voice a chant that wove through the fog, calling to the shadows that surrounded them. Dr. Haydock, pale and trembling, clutched his torch, its light useless against the darkness that pressed in. The village's secret was laid bare. St. Mary Mead was a cage for an ancient hunger, and Miss Marple's blood, as Eliza Marple's heir, was the key to its fate. The shadows were legion now, their forms almost solid, their claws gleaming with fresh blood, Elspeth Grange's, Clara Henshaw's, Tommy Pierce's. Their whispers were a storm, layered with the voices of the 1793 keepers, Eliza, Thomas, Margaret Blackwood, pleading, accusing, warning, "Jane, your blood, the gate, choose." Blackwood's eyes gleamed with fanatic zeal as he raised his arms higher, the symbols on his skin pulsing in time with the well. "The Devourer wakes, Jane," he shouted, his voice ecstatic. "Your blood will open the gate and St. Mary Mead will feed it forever." Miss Marple's heart pounded, but her mind was a steel trap, piecing together the final threads of the puzzle. The locket, with its lock of Eliza's hair and the stone etched with a six-fingered hand, were relics of the 1793 pact, meant to seal the well and bind the Devourer. The ritual required blood at three places: the well, the heart, the church, and the hearth, her cottage, but Blackwood had twisted it, offering the blood of others to weaken the seal. Her cottage, marked on the map, was the hearth, and her blood, as Eliza's kin, was the final key. The choice was hers: sacrifice herself to close the gate, or let the Devourer consume the village. She stepped forward, the locket's light flaring, pushing back the shadows that lunged at her. "Gideon," she said, her voice calm but cutting, through the hum. "You're not their master. The shadows use you just as they used Margaret. You think you'll gain power, but you'll be their meal." Blackwood's smile faltered, his eyes flickering with doubt. "You know nothing, Jane. The Devourer promised me eternity. Your blood will seal my pact, not theirs." "Then why do they fear this?" She held up the locket, its light blazing, and the shadows hissed, their forms unraveling at the edges. The stone in her other hand burned, its six-fingered symbol glowing red, and the well trembled, the eye below blinking for the first time as if in pain. Eliza's voice whispered, clearer now. "The locket. The stone. Your blood. End it." "Doctor." Haydock grabbed her arm, his face ashen. "Jane, don't. If you give your blood, you'll die. There has to be another way." "There isn't," she said, her eyes fixed on Blackwood. "The village was built to cage the Devourer, and my family was its keeper. This is my duty." She pulled her letter opener from her pocket, its blade glinting in the locket's light. The shadows surged, their claws slashing the air, but the locket's glow held them at bay, their whispers turning to screams. Blackwood leapt from the well's rim, his scarred arms outstretched, his face twisted with rage. "Give it to me," he snarled, lunging for the locket. Miss Marple sidestepped, her movement swift despite her age, and Dr. Haydock swung his torch, catching Blackwood's shoulder. The shadows roared, their forms coalescing around their master, but the locket's light burned brighter, forcing them back. Miss Marple reached the well, the eye below staring up, its pupil a void that promised oblivion. She pricked her finger with the letter opener, letting a drop of blood fall onto the locket. The light exploded, a blinding white that seared the fog, the shadows, the very air. Blackwood screamed, his scars blistering, his body collapsing as the shadows turned on him, their claws tearing into his flesh. The hum became a wail, the ground splitting, and the eye in the well blinked rapidly, its light fading. She placed the locket and the stone into an indentation on the well's rim, where they fit perfectly, as if made for it. The blood from her finger mingled with Eliza's hair, and the well shook, stones crumbling into the void. The shadows dissolved, their screams echoing into silence, and the fog began to lift, revealing the village, battered but whole. The hum stopped, the eye vanished, and the well was just a well again, its depths dark but empty. Dr. Haydock helped her stand, his hands shaking. "Is it over, Jane? Did we do it?" She nodded, her strength ebbing but her resolve unbroken. "The gate is closed, the Devourer sleeps, but the village will always carry its secret." They returned to Rosehaven, the locket and stone now cold, their power spent. The footprints were gone, the whispers silent, but St. Mary Mead would never be the same. Miss Marple burned the journal, the map, the letters, letting the ashes scatter in the wind. The case was closed, but the weight of her blood, her duty, lingered. As dawn broke, the village stirred, its people emerging, unaware of how close they had come to annihilation. Miss Marple sat by her hearth, her knitting needles clicking, her eyes sharp. The shadows were gone, but she would watch always for the day they might return.